Hi there, and welcome back to another episode at Station Road. Now, today's episode is a little bit of a mixed bag, so there's a little bit of finishing off detail that I add to the warehouse area, so that is one component, and then we actually move away and around the corner a little bit and take a look at the street scene and how that is actually going to connect with the street that heads down past the warehouse. So I've made a wee index of what's going to be covered in today's episode, and firstly we start with the warehouse area, and in particular I start looking at what items I will actually populate the warehouse yard area with. So one of the things that I look at is installing a yard crane, and then we sort of move on to the outer wall of the warehouse yard, where I add in a little bit of a wall foundation to where the pavement meets the wall, and that just is going to help with giving the wall a little bit more of a solid feel. There's also some wall supports or columns on the inside of the wall too. Look at adding those, and lastly I take a look at the theme of the warehouse and what is actually happening there. So this is all based on the warehouse recently being closed on a permanent basis, and there's going to be a few additions of people who have lost their jobs and are protesting outside the gates of the warehouse. So in the second part, it's taking a look at the street scene and how that is going to connect in with the street that I've created outside the warehouse. So we've got a 90-degree turn, of course, in the street, and it's working out what sort of buildings, and also the building on the corner as it turns around and heads into the street where the goods yard is. So one of the items on the list, of course, for this area was a corner shop. So we take a look at that, and then there's also some additional low relief shops too to add into this area. And finally, I look at what's going to be happening across the street from these low relief shops. So I think without further ado, let's just get into what I got up to. So the areas in question for today's episode, of course, include a few more details to be added into this warehouse area, and you can already spot some details I've added, but we'll track back and head to these a bit later in the video, where I've populated this area with a few protestors. And I haven't moved any further in terms of the scenic side of things or weathering for the actual yard area yet. One of the things that I really sort of wanted to get on with, and as mentioned previously, is looking at how the street scene is going to work wrapping around this corner. Now, I'd previously mentioned, probably several episodes back now, where I was going to use a Metcalf corner store or corner shop and undertake a bit of surgery on it and get it into a shape that's going to work around here. So essentially kind of converting the corner shop into low relief. So we have these low relief shops here, and these were the original shops that were along this stretch of street here, so I'm going to reuse those. Now, I thought actually at this point it'd be quite interesting to sort of mention, and it sort of comes down to that debate that there seems to go on a little bit in the model railway community as to card and paper versus plastic buildings. And of course, one of the biggest disadvantage, of course, with card buildings is their ability to last, or their durability, I should say. And the jury's out for me on that one, because interestingly, these shops which haven't really been modified in any way. I made these probably 8-9 years ago, and they've been sitting on this layout ever since, and they're still in really good condition. There's no deterioration whatsoever, and interestingly they've also gone through a little bit of surgery. I'd cut them off their original base and have applied them to a new pavement base, so you know that they've certainly stood the test of time. And what's even more interesting is these ones here haven't actually been given a clear coat of varnish or had any weathering applied to them. The only thing I've done is added a very, very weak black wash to the roof just to dull it down a little bit, but apart from that they've had no other treatment to them and they're still going strong. So I'm a staunch believer in card kits, whether it be Metcalf or scratch built or even scale scenes kits. So these are going to remain in here somewhere, and what I'm also going to add in here is some further Metcalf low relief buildings, but I thought I'd change it up a little bit rather than just have more of these and go for a new-ish Metcalf kit. I don't think it's been on the market for too long, maybe a year or two, and I thought I'd have a crack at adding these in. So that is also going to be in this episode. So I think first things first, we'll just get into what I've been working on to populate this yard a little bit further, and also go into some detail with these chaps here protesting outside the gate. So as I mentioned, I'm considering how to populate the yard area for this warehouse, and one of the items that I'm going to place in here is a yard crane, and this is a Pico kit product, so it's this item here. So what I've actually done here, of course, is this is made up of 3 layers of 2mm card, and it's been laser cut out to fit the curve of the base of the crane. So this is the kit set part, although I have trimmed off what appeared to be some kind of stone edge around there, so it's a little bit smaller. And this is the crane component itself, which I've painted up and weathered. So I want the crane to have quite a derelict look to it. It's really been out of action for a wee while. We've got some wire that's come adrift and it's all piled up inside there. One of the supporting stays has broken and that is just drooping down from there, and that's going to sit on top of there. So I'm just currently at the moment wrapping the outer edge of here in the same brick that the warehouse is made from, and then we have a capping stone which will be laid on top, and this is also laser cut to the curve, and that's going to sit on there. And once again I'll do the same process where I'll soak this capping stone in some super glue. So the crane itself, it's actually quite a large boom on this crane, and it may appear possibly a little bit too big for the yard. If I find that it's just too oversized, I may cut a section out of here and then stitch it together and put in some what appears like riveted metal plates in this I-beam, so it reduces the length of the boom. But we'll see how it looks at first, and if I sort of feel compelled to need to do that, we'll do it. So once again I'm using rocket card glue to apply this brick edging around here. So of course I spray painted this up in a base sort of grey, and of course I will do some weathering on it. It's a little bit glossy too, so it's definitely going to need a matte varnish over it as well. So I've sort of narrowed myself in on what is really happening with this warehouse, and I'm actually going along the lines of it's just recently closed down. Within days it is closed down, and I'm actually going to put up closure notices on the fence and the gates, and I'm going to put some people standing outside, some ex-workers of the warehouse who aren't very happy with the fact that the warehouse is closed down. So we're going to have a few people out there kind of picketing or protesting outside the gate with some placards and so forth as well. So it really hopefully will capture an event that's taken place with this yard and warehouse, and it kind of fits in, I think, with the era too of the layout, which is, you know, late 50s through to the late 60s, early 70s, and a lot of these places actually did close at that point. So some other things that I'm actually going to populate the yard with is possibly some leftover supplies and goods that have yet to be collected, and have them sort of stacked up around the yard. And then of course will also just be simply other junk and items scattered about, old pallets, ladders, oil drums, all sorts of stuff, to really kind of give it the impression that it's pretty much at the end of its days. So this is possibly a little bit make-believe in terms of a crane, because I think these were more common at canals, so you often saw them on the banks of a canal in an industrial area. But I'm using this in this situation, and of course fabricated my own base, so we've got these little wee steps that I would imagine this was where people would step up to operate the crane. So that's the base for the crane, and I kind of think it's going to work okay. It sort of fits in with the curved warehouse architecture with this sort of curved brick fascia around the outside. So I'm just going to run some super glue around this capping stone, and I think this is certainly going to help a lot in terms of its durability. And as you can see, it changes the colour of the card. Now, all the card that I use for scratch building is grey mounting card, and I either use 1 or 2 mil. This is 1 mil mounting card. And it's just a case of drizzling this on. And interestingly, it seems to, when it darkens down, it gives a reasonably good effect. So that's what the super glue does to the card. So it's quite a nice effect, and of course adds the durability. So we can now see the crane in place, and I'm still not really sure whether I need to reduce the boom down on this crane. It's not too bad, and it kind of lines up with a vehicle or vehicles, lorries that would come into the yard and need the crane in order to lift loads off the back of them and maybe shift that load near the dock entrance to the building. It certainly adds another element to the yard. And so, as I mentioned, of course there's going to be a lot of other things populating this yard, and hopefully we'll get onto those things maybe in the next episode. So one of the other things I'm going to do, which is on the outer wall next to the pavement, is just add in a little bit of lower sort of footing to the wall, I guess. And this is some leftover 1mm mounting card that has had the 45-degree bevel cut on it, and of course I've drizzled some super glue across the top edge of it, and I'm just going to attach some brickwork to this outer edge. And what I also did is ran a brown felt tip pen across the top edge of the paper, which eliminates that white edge, and we're going to glue that on there. Now this is a lot deeper than what these are going to be, so I've created extra for trimming out. So once again I'm just using the rocket card glue. So that sort of gives a nice sort of edge at the top where you can't really tell that it's paper and card. Right, so I'll let those dry, which won't take too long. Now, one thing I should point out is this is printed brick paper that of course has had a matte varnish spray applied to it. If I didn't do that, I would find if I was working with this too much, it's actually going to wear the print off the paper. So these brick base strips, which I've got here, we're just going to tuck these in here, and it's just going to give the brick wall maybe a little bit more of a solid appearance down here, and then of course another strip for the lower section. So we'll glue these on now. So the card profile for this is not too deep, that it's got a reasonable amount of vertical flex in it, which means that I can actually kind of push it to the curve of the pavement. Right, so that's these lower plinths to the outer wall in place, and what I'm actually going to do is do some vertical uprights on the inside of the wall. Since this is kind of partially a retaining wall, I would assume there would be some kind of small buttresses on the inside that would help support the road. So we're going to make up a couple of those. I think just 3, 1, 2, 3 to put on the inside here. So as I mentioned, we're setting the scene for this warehouse, which has just recently closed, and we have some of the ex-workers from the warehouse adorning some placards and protesting outside the gates. They have been locked out, and the foreman is standing there making sure that they don't start scaling the wall or trying to get through the gates. So I've got some closure notices. One is attached to this gate, and then there's also one on the brick wall up by the other entrance up there. So that's the corner shop now complete, and of course it's had its surgery around the back of it, so it becomes essentially low relief. So just taking a comparison with a full corner shop, because I do have one in another location, and you can see where I've cut away at the back of the building in order to make it low relief. So what I actually did is modified the kit as I built it, so I didn't build the whole thing and then cut it around the back. So it was all measured out, and the various components that needed to be cut were cut away at the time of construction. So going along with the theme which I've mentioned in the past about the businesses and local retail shops and so forth on the Station Road layout, I'm naming the shops, of course, after family members. So I now have Mum's Cake Shop on the layout. So we now have Kate's Cake Creations, and this is in honour of my mum's rather sweet tooth that she has. And so we've got a sign adorning on the fascia now with her name, and then we also have a reasonable amount of interior detail in there now, and we've got Mum standing behind the counter. We've also got some shelves with various delicacies and a few cakes and things like that, and I've also installed some lighting, so we have a lamp out on the street plus also some interior lighting in the shop, and I think it's come together pretty well for this corner shop. So I've now completed the low relief shops, which did need a bit of modification to sort of fit in and suit the street scene. So one of the interesting things about these Metcalfe shops is the low relief is a lot lower than these shops here. So it is obviously designed for a space that's much more confined. So what I've had to do is actually add some depth to the back of these shops, which of course has also meant trying to figure out what is best to do with the roof. So with the success from the laser cut gates at the warehouse, I thought, why not try and laser cut some very fine roof cresting and little finials that poke up as well, using the same black card. Now it's 0.6 millimeters, I think, and I was able to actually cut these roof crestings out with a reasonable amount of success. So it creates a flat roof across the top, and this was sort of used in architecture at various points, and I think it sort of works reasonably well in this situation. So with the additional depth to the building, what was needed was to create a card box type frame on the back, and then of course extend the end walls of the brickwork. Now what I actually did here was actually scanned an end wall as it currently was into the computer, then using Photoshop extended the wall, and of course at one end I also at the same time thought, let's add in a ghost sign, and this is the logo for Bergen and Ball, which from my understanding is a long-standing manufacturer of garden tools. I think they may have initially started producing garden shears, but I think they did branch out into other types of tools as well. So I thought that was fitting for what the actual shop is down here, and once again this is also named after a family member, and this is my father-in-law, and it is Eric's Garden and Hardware Supplies. So my father-in-law, he's a very keen gardener, has quite an extensive veggie garden, and he's also pretty handy on the tools as well. So I thought, what better type of shop for him to have than a garden and hardware supply store. So we've got Eric down in the shop, he's possibly closing up at the end of the day, and of course upstairs I have my mother-in-law, who's quite pleasantly sitting down watching a bit of telly. So the other shop is just the bulk standard shop that came with the kit, which is Juniper's Books, and also it just sort of has a more basic interior in it. So one other modification that I did make to this building was this window here. Now the Metcalf kit really only had two options for window frames. One was just no window frame and just quite a large chunk of glass it would have been, and the other option just had a single frame down the middle, and both of them to me looked kind of a little bit odd. So using the Cricut Joy vinyl cutting machine, I created some new window frames to put in here, which just increase the number of window panes, and to me it just looks a little bit more authentic, realistic looking. So by increasing the depth of these shops, it of course lines up a lot better with the other shops and these existing shops on the right, and also it lines up with the new corner store a little bit better as well. So if we move across the street, I've rearranged these buildings. So originally this access road into the goods yard used to actually be between these two, and what I've decided to do is actually hack that out and join these two together. So I may or may not reuse this piece of cobblestone access road. It just depends on how sort of tidy I can make it. I may make a new section here, but it means that I can push all of this along, and what that's going to do is create a better space in here, which is where I wanted to add in a coal merchant. So I'm going to put in here a kind of coal merchant's building and entranceway and so forth in here, and I'm actually going to work from one of the Scale Scenes downloadable kits, and that will go here on the corner, and then this will be sort of open coal yard in here, and we'll have some coal bunkers along here, of course, where coal can be dropped off by trains coming in here. So that's what the plan is for in this area here, and slowly but surely we are creeping this way into the goods yard area, and of course the whole elevation of this goods yard. So there we have it for this episode, and I'm certainly a lot happier now that we've got a little bit of a street scene going on around the corner. So it now gives me more of an impression of how these two scenes are going to be connecting together. So as I mentioned, for the coal merchant area, I'm going to use one of these scale scenes downloadable kits. Now, I did show up some photos of one particular kit that I was thinking of, and I'll probably use that kit, but I will be kit bashing it to suit the area and sort of work it in a little bit better with what the purpose of this building would be within the coal merchant's yard. So once again, I just thought I'd take the opportunity to thank all of those who have left their feedback and comments in the previous episode, and also tickled that like button, but also actually one particular question that a few people had actually asked, and that was with regard to the actual brick texture that I used on the curved warehouse. Now, as a graphic designer, I have a subscription to the Adobe Creative Cloud and also Adobe Stock Image Library, and that is actually where the texture came from. So it is a commercial texture from a commercial stock library, and of course I did actually pay for that. And the Adobe Stock Library does actually have quite a few good sort of interesting textures in there, and this one in particular I thought suited the curved warehouse extremely well. Now, the other great thing about this texture is it's also a seamless texture, so you can just repeat it over and over and it has a seamless join to it. Now, I did actually hunt around to see what free textures that might be available on the internet, and there are plenty of available textures out there that are free, but I did find that the Adobe stock image that I've used, or texture I've used, it certainly did have a much nicer quality to it. So I'll sign off for now, and once again, don't forget to like this video, and it's really important for you guys to like these videos, because the more likes that you get on a video, the more chances that will be actually shared amongst other people in the YouTube community who can take an interest in what's happening here at Station Road, and also what's happening actually within the model railway community. So don't forget to subscribe as well. Do take care, look after yourselves, and I will catch you next time. Bye for now.